I am Jeff Moncrief. I am the field CTO for a teeny tiny startup that is based out of Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. Okay, that is northeastern Canada, the Atlantic time zone. I didn't know it existed until I got this gig. Okay, I've spent the last 5 years just focused at Sunry on IAM security in the public cloud. So GCP, Azure, AWS. And right now we have kind of retooled and created a new product. It's the world's first cloud permissions firewall. It's a firewall for IAM. Sounds crazy, sounds provocative. I saw that look. That's kind of what we want. Okay, so it's actually really freaking cool. There's nothing like it in the world. Folks really, really like it. If you've ever heard the term least privilege, this actually allows you to actually, for the first time ever, get there. Okay. Tonight is not a sales pitch though. Okay. I'm barely going to even talk about it. What we're going to talk about tonight though is really through the school of hard knocks, everything that I've learned over the last 5 years working with hundreds of customers that are struggling with securing IAM in the public cloud. Okay. And this absolutely relates to OWASP because a lot of what we deal with, what I deal with on a day-to-day basis is cleaning up the mess that's left behind through poor software development practices, especially infrastructure as a code, Terraform, CloudFormation, those kinds of things. I call it cyber litter, cyber garbage. There's so much mess that's left behind with active entitlements and permissions in the cloud that can be used against you. Okay, so we're going to talk about that, make sure that everyone understands what it is, why it's a problem. I'm going to do a live demonstration where we're actually going to go through. I may just abandon this damn thing. It's fine. Oh, it's the Zoom. Yeah, so we're actually going to go through a live IAM exploitation. I've been doing this live hack for years. People love it. It's one thing to see this conceptually and hear about it and talk about it. It's another thing to actually see an exploit and how this can be, a really bad day for you if you don't do something about this. Then we'll give you some tips and tricks on what you can do. All right, my goal with this session is for you to walk away with a couple nuggets to maybe rethink about how you're doing things when you're creating things in the public cloud as it relates to cloud native apps and its dependency on things inside identity and access management. Okay. Now there is this really, really cool, sorry for those of you on Zoom, you're not eligible, but we've got this really, really cool Falcon laptop and phone charger. Okay, it's Sun rebranded. There's a raffle, so please scan. Okay, at the end, I will draw a random number. I'm going to assign everyone numbers. We're going to actually have ChatGPT draw us random. Okay, and I've actually already got the prompt ready to go. So thought that would be kind of fun, and you're going to walk away with that. Okay, so with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, so well, actually, before I get into this, let me gauge everyone here in the room. How familiar are you with just building things out inside the public cloud, AWS, Azure, GCP? Raise your hand. Okay. How familiar are you with securing identity and access management in the public cloud? Okay. All right. So that's good though, because that helps me. Some of you are a little bit more experienced than others. I'm going to try and be pretty pragmatic, right? So that everyone is level set and understands what I'm talking about. Okay. I'm known, so I run the SE team at Sunry, but I'm also the company's field CTO. So I go around doing lots of evangelism and talks like this, right? But I'm known for saying a couple things. One of them is hackers don't hack anymore, they just log in. The stats show it, the stats prove it. Over and over again, almost every single public breach that you've heard about on the public cloud over the last, 5, 6 years is a result of a compromised credential, a compromised access key, a public exposure in a GitHub repo. Okay, why would you craft a bespoke exploit if you can just log right in? So that's something that we have to understand. Identity, how many of you heard identity is the new perimeter? Heard that for years and years and years. Identity is the new network. Everything in a cloud native environment is predicated on identity. Everything. You can't create a VPC. You can't create an NSG. You can't create a VM without IAM permissions. Okay? Everything in that control plane in the public cloud relies on IAM. All right. So I love showing folks this website. Okay. This is a public GitHub repo. And I'll actually show it to you live. I like showing it live. So if I get out of here, this is a public GitHub repo. Okay. It's Rami Mac, AWS customer security incidents. And I've been tracking this repo for years. Okay. You can see it was last updated 2 weeks ago. If you scroll through it, you're going to see just public breach after public breach just for AWS. Okay. As recently as March of 2025. Okay. That's one thing. Now watch when I search for the word credential. How many results do I get? 123. Oh. It's wild. Okay. And if I scroll down, you can see all the yellow highlights. They just go on and on and on. Okay. If I search for heat, there's around 70 something, 80 something. Okay. The point is, and you can see also all these indicators in the Chrome search results, just how prevalent the word credential is. The point being, the data doesn't lie. Okay. From a public cloud security breach perspective, this is the problem that you must combat. Okay. Compromised credentials. Okay. And that's why securing IAM is so important. Okay. Okay. This is just an AWS. There's 14,000 permissions. Okay. Times that by 3. Okay. That's GCP and Azure. That's what we're trying to combat when we're talking about least privilege in the public cloud. Okay. 92% of identities have excessive permissions. So they are over permissioned, right? They have too many entitlements. They have too many permissions. Why? It's a heck of a lot easier to give you all star access as developers than to figure out every single least privilege policy that you need to do your job. Okay. And even if I was able to give you each an optimal least privilege policy, tomorrow your job duty changes and you're going to need new entitlements and new permissions. Can you imagine managing thousands of individual policies for individual users? It's impossible. Okay. This one right here, this is the one that is, I would say, the most important data point when it comes to securing IAM. Okay. The vast majority of the stuff that's out there in IAM, service accounts, service principals, roles, okay, instance profiles, service linked roles, service linked accounts, the list goes on. It's not used. Okay. I don't care which tool of choice you use. You can use Wiz, you can use Prisma, you can use, IAM Access Analyzer inside AWS, Entra ID inside Azure. List goes on, right? They're all going to tell you the same thing. You got a bunch of cyber litter and cyber garbage that you got to go clean up. Okay, projects passed, teams passed, turnover, attrition, but also a big problem with the proliferation of what we call non-human identities is infrastructure as code. And just constantly creating identities over and over and over again, and then being orphaned and abandoned and left behind. But guess what? They've all got active entitlements and permissions in your cloud, okay, that can be used against you. And then I love this 30 minutes per identity to fix. That's one of our marketing teams. This is one of our marketing team slides. I think that stat's BS. I think that should be weeks, because I've learned this. We've worked with hundreds of customers over the years that I have at Sunry. And one thing that I can say with certainty is that folks are scared to death to delete things in the public cloud. Why are they scared? Bingo. You don't want to lose your job. So what do? You accept the risk, you leave it out there. Okay. Or you spend weeks trying to research whether or not you can safely delete it. Right. And so this kind of constitutes what I would call an identity crisis in the public cloud. Okay. And then it's all kind of brought to life with your tool of choice. Right. I mentioned most everyone here has heard of Wiz. Most everyone here has heard of Prisma Cloud. Right. This actually was how we got started in the business, was by showing companies a bunch of least privilege problems in the public cloud, right? You've got all these excessive permissions, all these unused things. You've got all of these, the tachometers are all the way over in the red. Good luck. You got to go fix it. And that's kind of where the state of all tooling is right now. That's just the truth. Right now, this is a problem that you have to fix by hand, right? But you can't ignore it. So this is a screenshot from our product, the Cloud Permissions Firewall. Okay, this is a real customer that we're working with right now. All I will say is that you've heard of them. Okay, when we plugged into their AWS production environment, this is what we found: 22,000 overprivileged identities. Even scarier, that number. That's wild. That's 59,790 zombies, is what we call unused identities, across 900 accounts in AWS. Think about that. 60,000 unused roles, IAM users, instance profiles, service accounts, Terraform, Git runner, those kinds of things, right? All with active entitlements. Okay, and then unused services, unused regions. This one right here is super interesting. I would say it took me probably 2 years of doing this full time to understand how important that number is. The 121 third parties with access. Do you guys know what that means? Exactly. You did a demo or eval with insert the SaaS vendor 3 years ago, and you forgot about it. You're like, oh, we got to move on to the next one. We're doing a bake-off. We got 2 or 3 different competitors that we're looking at. You forgot that role's out there. You forgot that role's in all 99 of your accounts on top of that, right? It's sitting out there with active permissions. If that role gets compromised at the third party, that's a Trojan horse right there, straight into your cloud. Okay. Really, it's just third party doesn't sound scary. It's wild though, whenever we plug in and we find that, you got 121 third parties. Did you realize it? Oh, and then we put our least privilege analytics on it, and it's, oh, of the 121, 70 of them haven't been used in 2 years. Right? Do you have a question?
Does that include all individual accounts, or is that aggregated by like party, domain, vendor? There's 121 identities.
It's 121 identities throughout your entire AWS cloud, all of your accounts and all your organizations that have an account ID, an external ID number that is not yours. It's not one of yours. Yep. And again, this is real. We are working with this company right now. It is, when we lit this sucker up, it was fascinating. Needless to say, we closed them, which is super exciting for me and SEs, right? All right, so why does this matter to you all? Okay, so the OWASP top 10, I assume you all know what this is. You probably know way more about this than I do. I had to do a little bit of research for this talk this evening, right? To learn about these, right? But identity is the new network, okay? And I mean that, like, if you can control IAM, you are God. You are. And like I said, you can't deploy anything without permissions in a cloud native environment. Okay, so and it's interesting because, geez, I mean, we plug into customer environments, and you guys know what it means to have a flat network? What's it mean, Ray?
There's signals, touch everything else.
Nailed it. Everything can touch everything else. That is by far what we see when we connect into any sort of brownfield, which means mature AWS, Azure, GCP environment. They just deployed all these applications, all these web apps, all these databases, all these microservices, all these containers, and they never thought about the fact that everything can talk to everything. Okay? And our old product, it would map out all these crazy lateral movement diagrams, which you've probably seen those before, and they look like spider webs. And they're just communication paths through the identity fabric where everything can talk to everything. And that kind of led us to, customer after customer asking us, well, how do we fix the mess? That's what kind of led us to creating the Cloud Permissions Firewall, which is the ability to actually fix it, right? And you can kind of see here, I'm not gonna go through these, but how it maps to the different OWASP top 10. But it creates a big mess, right? And if you've ever seen a lateral movement path through a network, right? How you can privilege escalate and move from host to host over the network. That entire scenario is totally applicable in the public cloud with no network whatsoever. Okay? You can do that entire kill chain, that's what we call it. You can do the entire kill chain of a threat through the identity fabric without ever having the first network packet. It's all done through the IAM fabric, okay? That's kind of what we're going to show you whenever I do the live demo. Unused identities, right? Again, this is what I would say is the most scary because they're so prevalent, they're not used. People are scared to delete them. But when you look at those lateral movement attack paths or whatever your tool of choice is through IAM, our tool has shown this for years now. Without a doubt, the vast majority of those hops are unused. Okay? When you get rid of this mess, your posture goes up significantly. Okay? Because you remove role chaining, you remove privilege escalation, you remove cross-account trust, you removed confused deputy situations. Okay? So you want all the tachometers to go from red to green? Just do this. I promise you, it is massive what cleaning up all the unused stuff can do for your security posture. Over permissioned identities. This is the identities that you do need, okay? But they just have too many permissions, right? So let's just say that you need to go do your job every day, right? And it's just taking a look at network traffic, taking a look at VPC flow logs in AWS or NSG flow logs in Azure, whatever it might be, right? That's great. Do you need permission to create and delete VPCs all the time? No. Create, delete internet gateways, transit gateways, turn off CloudTrail logging? No, you don't. But guess what? Most identities do because folks don't have the time to grant those permissions on an ad hoc basis or to figure out the optimal policy for each one of you as it relates to least privilege. Okay? So this is a big, big problem. Too many entitlements. You know, in AWS, we might expose that there's 10 people that have administrator level access. Okay. Or 10 roles. But guess what? We found another 990 that have what's called IAM pass role, which means they can give themselves administrator access. So it's essentially 1,000 administrators, right? There's too many entitlements. It is a problem, and it's got to be addressed. It has to be cleaned up, right? IAM misconfigurations, okay? Nesting, inheritances, cross-account trust relationships, those kinds, especially in Azure. Azure, when you get into group inheritances, it's really hard to figure out what an identity's true, what we call effective permissions is, because you have to factor in all of those group memberships and all those inheritances to figure out what that identity truly has permission to do. Another problem with Azure is it actually has a default allow model, whereas GCP and AWS, they have a default deny model. So it's kind of the inverse there. But you think about this is something that fascinated me. I do this demo sometimes where I show a role in AWS. Okay. I show it to you in the console. It has no permissions at all. None. So you're like, okay, it must be secure. But then let's just say it's in a sandbox account. But then I flip over to production and I show you another role. That role actually has a configuration on it with a reverse trust back to the first one in the other account. It says it can assume it. Okay. What that means is that first role can become the other one and have all of its permissions and entitlements and do whatever it wants to do. Okay. But to the naked eye, you thought that identity was secure. All right. So this just IAM misconfigurations like that, they get us in trouble. Another one's temporary access. Hey, someone needs access just for a quick period of time. Let's create this identity, give them more entitlements, give them the administrator role, whatever that might be, and then you forget about it. Okay. So just misconfigurations in general are a big problem. Is there a question? Yes, sir.
We spoke with some of these clients granted, it can exist outside of this, but it seems like this is all indicative of just, they don't necessarily have a cloud security themselves, right? They got the cloud. There was a certain part of the organization that came in and said, hey, we need to put something out in the cloud. And someone went up there, set up some projects, set up some folders, and created a structure to allow the business on board.
Mhm.
And over time, it kept going on.
Right.
But you kind of see this from a standpoint of, do you start with the question of, do you actually have a proper cloud security? If the chances are they don't, then all of these things will be victim of that.
In the ideal world, you're right. We want to design secure, and that's kind of what I'm evangelizing this evening to you, right? You want to design secure, you want to clean up your mess, you want to design at least privilege. But that's just not how it works. That's not how it works in the real world. It's just not. In a mature environment, like we're working with a customer, they have 20 teams that are constantly deploying things out in the public cloud. And this is just a constant problem that they have having to try and clean this up. So yeah, in the ideal world, you would want a secure program where you architect securely, everything's at least privilege. But in a brownfield environment, that's just not how it works. I wish it did. Yeah. I mean, you think about all of the cloud security tools that are out there for public cloud security. We wouldn't be in business if this was a problem. This wasn't a problem. Yeah. And you think about the tooling that's out there now that I've mentioned, it's all visibility tooling. And it's all in the red. It's all showing you have a big problem. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, supply chain access. So this is pretty big for you all. So there's two components to supply chain access risk. Okay. The first is CI/CD. Everyone know what CI/CD is? Yep. Awesome. Okay. Terraform. Yep. So that's the first culprit. Deploying identities in infrastructure as code over and over and over and over again. And we see this whenever we plug into customer environments. There's so many Terraform build roles, Git runner roles, things like that that are out there. They were meant to do something and they were just left behind. They were orphaned. Okay. And because there's all that automation, it just creates that much more proliferation. The other problem with supply chain access, it goes back to that dashboard picture that I showed you with the third-party access. Okay. It's where you get into, I think it actually says it on the slide. Maybe not, but that's where we get into the Uber problem, the Capital One problem, third parties, right? That's where it's a big problem where you've got to have visibility into that third-party access. You have to have visibility into whether or not those identities are actually being used. And then you got to clean them up, get rid of them. Get rid of them or do something to at least control their entitlements and restrict them from being used to protect the business. You don't have to delete. There's a way to actually do this where you don't delete identities, that you actually just contain their entitlements. That's kind of what I do every day with our product. But you got to think about that. And there's something that's interesting, especially in AWS. You don't have to have an identity in order to have access into someone else's cloud. Did you know that? So you can clean up IAM all you want. But if you put a resource policy on a bucket that says that X external identity can access that bucket, that KMS key, that SQS queue, they have full-time access to it. And you would never know unless you were doing full-time policy scrutiny on all the resources. That's something that blew me away that I didn't even realize until fairly recently. That external entities can have full access, in some cases, into your cloud without actually having an identity that they can assume, because you just granted them direct access directly on that particular resource. Okay. Super scary, I think. Okay. Now for the main event. So I mentioned that I've been doing this for years, this live hack thing. I've done it at webinars and all kinds of things. And I used to do it by hand, actually doing the commands, STS get caller identity, STS assume, right? It took a little time. So it got to the point where I wrote a script and it automates a lot of it. Okay. But it's pretty cool. All right. We're actually going to do this live on an EC2 instance. What you're about to see, let me explain this to you, okay? Because the actual hack goes quick, right? But it's a result of a lot of IAM screw ups, okay? So we're gonna start with the left-hand side over here, okay? I'm coming in and I'm SSHing into this exposed EC2 instance. I sometimes do this directly from my laptop using the AWS SDK with a compromised key showing you that I don't even need this. I can do the same thing directly from my laptop straight into your cloud. You don't need a jump box, which is super frightening. All you need is the AWS command line, one key, and I have access straight into the dead center of your cloud. That's all it takes. That's why these GitHub exposures are so, I know that it's become routine, but it's still, it's so scary. It's so bad, right? When you hear about all those credentials that I showed you in that GitHub repo, right? So, but just for simplicity, we're going to start here. I'm going to SSH into this guy. And I'm going to use my script, a little tool, to try and do a little poking around, a little recon. Anybody know what an instance profile is in AWS? An instance profile. You nailed it. Yep. People don't think about that. One of my silly little sayings is that an EC2 instance, an Azure VM, a GCP VM, they are nothing without that connection to the platform. Okay? I call it an invisible umbilical cord. Straight into the platform. And what it does is every EC2 instance typically has got an instance profile associated with it, which is an identity. So when you're on this, you're not this, you're actually this. The moment you hit that instance, you get a whole bunch of permissions you can use through the entire platform. Okay? So I'm going to try and figure out what this thing can do. Do a little recon in S3 DynamoDB. I'm going to do a role enumeration. Then hop over to this guy. Let's show you what that looks like. Okay? Because of the cross-account trust relationship, from this side over, remember I told you that these sometimes work in reverse, so you would never know that this has access? Because of a cross-account trust relationship, I'm going to enumerate, come over here. When I did that, which logical boundary did I cross? I went from sandbox to prod, okay? In prod, as this identity, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a little recon. We're poking around. See what's there, okay? If I can find something, I'm stealing it, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, let's do it. All right, so just proving that this is no smoke and mirrors. If anyone is familiar with AWS IAM Identity Center, that's what this is. I am logged into the sandbox, and I'm going to SSH into this instance right here, my health sandbox automate. Okay. So I also want to show you real quick. This is what it looks like doing this by hand. You can see why I wrote the tool. Okay. And this is the tool. And it's all Python, no trickery. It just assumes roles, enumerates roles. It tries to find stuff in DynamoDB and S3, and if it does, it will allow me to extract it. And I'm happy to share this with anybody. Please use it responsibly. But the truth is, it's just basic commands. It's just basic AWS commands, okay? All right, cool. So that is my command. Okay, so here, just to prove it, I'll exit out. Of course, does this every time. Do I see good? Yeah, that's good. I'm sorry for the closing the camera. I'm like, I can't even imagine how close I am. It must look terrible.
You don't look cute.
All right, cool. So I'm SSHing in with my private key into that instance. It's an Amazon AMI. I'm in the EC2 user home directory. I do an LS. You can see I've got some stuff that, I use this jump box a lot for different things, different demos and whatnot. But here's my script, right? If I wanted to, you can see here, right? So it's exactly what I just showed you. Okay. So what it does, got to keep remember where we are in the diagram. Okay. I'm on that EC2 instance. That could have been a compromised key. It could have been a 0-day that I just exploited. It doesn't really matter. Okay. It's not just an EC2 instance sitting out there. I promise you. This is about to prove it. So what the script does, it's got a main menu. Okay. It's going to ask, I can ask it who I am. This is, if you know the AWS command line, it's STS get caller identity. That's all I'm doing, right? I can say, hey, who am I? And it's going to tell you, your Tableau tester that we're assumed in as. Remember, Tableau tester was that first identity. Okay. And at this point in time, I'm going to go back and we have some options. We can enumerate roles. I can try and list data containers. I built the capability to show where you are in the cloud, right? So I can actually show the lateral movement path. We can go back a roll, go back and forth, etc. Okay. If I can find available data containers, if there's a permission for a data container, there's another menu that you're going to see where it gives me some options to do things with it. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is, well, I'm on the EC2 instance. I want to see if it has access to any data. Okay. So I'm going to do number 3, which is list available data containers. And it's got a couple of S3 buckets. It does not have any DynamoDB tables. That's okay. I know this is an SC of mine. She's out of Atlanta. Did this years ago. She wrote that one. I love it. I love it seeing this stuff. But I'm not going to mess with that. Okay. I could enumerate if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to enumerate roles. Do you understand what that means when I say I'm going to enumerate roles? Okay. I'm going to see what else I can become. What else can I assume? You're gonna have a bunch of failures. That's what all that stuff was up here. And then the script makes sense of it. This is a bug in my script where I show it twice. I just got to fix the bug. It's been there for a year now. But you can see what this Tableau tester has access to do and become. Okay. 1 through 10. You guys recognize Woodbury, the quarry, the farmhouse, Walking Dead? Yeah. So that's just some non-personal identities that we created here in this demo system. But there's a couple of other deploy infrastructure, sneaky, CPF role, which is the cloud permissionless firewall. So I'm going to try and become the sneaky role. Type in 11. There you go. Go to the main menu. I can ask it who I am. You are the sneaky role. Okay. Don't sandbox account. Cool. I can ask it, show me the lateral movement path. There you go. We came in from the internet, we're in the sandbox. Now we hit the EC2 instance, which has that instance profile. We've jumped from this identity to this identity. Everyone with me so far? It was. Yep. It's just programmatic. That's all it is. And then from here, I'm like, okay, maybe this sneaky role can enumerate data containers. It can't. Has no permissions. Crap, there's nothing there for me. Okay. All right, well, let's try to enumerate roles again. Can't enumerate roles, darn it. I'm gonna move back one role. You see what it says? I reverted to Tableau tester. I can double check. I'm Tableau tester. I'm gonna enumerate roles again. It's what we saw before. This time, I'm gonna try number 10, deploy infrastructure. Okay. Deploy infrastructure. Show the path. Okay. To make things quicker, I'm not going to try and show data containers. I know it won't work. I want to enumerate roles again. Ooh, look at this. Yep. You see this? All these are in the 6.1 account. That one's in the 2.3 account. Okay. So let's become that. Let's ask it who we are. Show the lateral movement path. Look at that. Interesting.
How did that role see the cross account access?
A little trickery. You do know IAM. Yeah. So by default, that would not have been enumerated. Yeah. I do another version of the hack where I actually show it in like a random JSON file, and that's how you found it. Yeah. But for tonight's purposes, I kind of fed it. Okay. I have never had anyone ask me that. That's pretty, yeah, you know your shit. Okay. All right. So we are now in the production account. We are assumed in as medical results reader. Okay. I'm going to ask it to list available data containers. Here we go. These are the S3 buckets it can see. These are DynamoDB tables that it can see. Okay. So we enumerate them. The script then gives you the option to go into any of these with a number next to it. Okay. So we're going to, how about X-ray image data in the S3 bucket? There you go. Some X-rays. Some PNG files. Okay. You see what it says? Enter the number to download. So we're going to download. Which one do you want to download? 3, 5. Okay. We're going to download 5. Download successful. We're going to go back and we're going to take a look at one of the DynamoDB tables. There you go. It just enumerates the table. We got some fake medical information in here. This you don't even have to extract, you just copy paste. Okay. And at this point in time, I'll go back one more. Let's take something else. Maybe it's health app claims upload or patient. I forget where this is. Hang on. Oh, there it is. Yeah. The dental claim. That JPEG. This is legit one of my sales engineers' dental claims. He put it up here. All right, cool. So we're good. So I'm gonna go back. And actually, I'm just gonna bail out. Okay. And the there you go. So what it did was it exfiltrated those two files, the dental claim and that PNG file that we chose. They weren't up there before, to the EC2 instance, and now you can do whatever you want to with them. Okay. And that's how easy this is. Now, I could have scripted this even more programmatically, and this whole thing could have enumerated dozens and dozens of identities and dozens, if not more, of S3 buckets and DynamoDB tables in 60 seconds. right? And just grabbed everything that could have wanted to find. But the bottom line is, real quick, I see your hand, real quick. The bottom line is none of that would have been possible if this mess didn't exist. Okay? Like, there's a good chance that that's not used, or that's not used. And if you can break the chain, what we call it, then you don't have this insane situation where a sandbox can lead into a production account and can grab sensitive data, right? But unfortunately, what we have seen over and over and over and over again in any mature environment is that this is what they're dealing with. And they didn't have visibility that it existed. That was the first problem, right? But even when you give them visibility, you got a problem where they're scared to death to delete this stuff. Okay? But you can see how it can make for a bad day. Was there a question? Yes, sir.
Just say you're looking at the access logs, what would pop up?
You would see the identities getting assumed. You would see that in the CloudTrail logs. If you had what we call, our product, the Cloud Permissions Firewall, we would have blocked all of this. You don't have to delete any of this, and we would have prevented every single bit of this. Because what we do is we essentially isolate and quarantine every one of these, and they can't use their entitlements unless you allow it to wake up in the Cloud Permissions Firewall. So the moment that this tried to assume this, it would have been blocked, it would trigger an alert, and you could have approved it or denied it in Slack or Teams. That's how we work, right? But yeah, otherwise, the traversal would be logged. Now, I could have permission, I could check my permissions as to whether or not I can go in and turn off CloudTrail too. Then you're really screwed.
You're trying to figure out what happened. What you that already has, which has already been granted, so it's not like something new has access to. So it's already has logs that this
Yeah.
has done these things over and over and over again. You would have to know to look for.
You wouldn't think it, you wouldn't know it was an anomaly.
Right. You would know.
Yeah. You would think it was normal day-to-day operations because that's how I built it. That's another problem that we deal with is that we show this, we show that it's all being used on a day-to-day basis. And you know what you have to do? You have to re-architect it because you did it wrong. But yeah, if this is normal day-to-day, you would never know.
Yeah, the only way you could possibly know is by seeing the IP address, the CloudTrail logs. But that might be enough.
But even then, you're using the EC2 instance to do everything.
So you would think you would have had these.
Yeah, but let's just say that there is no EC2 instance. I'm just using the AWS SDK at CLI, right? Then, yeah, I mean, it would be my personal PC, but that's not how it works. What happens is they typically use the compromised, you guys know what virtual private servers are, VPSs, right? Teeny tiny little VMs you can get from like GoDaddy or Bluehost or whatever. AWS actually does it as well. It's called Lightsail. They use a compromised one of those to go do all their nefarious activities. So you'd never be able to trace them.
It's like a web server too. It's probably time to fly.
Yep. Good questions. Oh yeah, what's the question online?
What's for sure to make many outbox abnormal?
No, check that through.
Okay, the people online said, any thoughts on a recent Microsoft OneDrive file picker possible issue with giving web apps full read access to all files and not just the file you've selected or to upload or download?
I'm not familiar with that. Is anyone else in here familiar with that? Is it a recent security disclosure or something?
I also am not aware. Yes, Microsoft OneDrive had a file picker. Oh, it was a really recent issue, not a security disclosure yet.
I don't know. I mean, it sounds like it's a problem if you're giving OneDrive or access from the web server to everything in OneDrive. I've found this over the years, and I've posted, if you look at my LinkedIn, I posted probably the biggest post I've ever done as far as traffic and impressions and whatnot was a couple years ago. I posted on LinkedIn about Azure, their support roles that are in Azure Active Directory, that folks don't realize that they actually have full admin access. And they're one of the default roles that their support engineers and partners are allowed to use. That post that I did I didn't expose it, but I evangelized about it and talked about it and kind of educated people about it. That one kind of took off. So I guess my point is, I'm not really surprised. Microsoft, remember I said they have that default allow? Yeah, they tend to be the most open. Yeah.
How often do you see IMDSB1? Are people getting rid of it?
I don't even know what that is.
It's the data service for EC2. So if you're running a web server on EC2 instance, you've got IMDSB1. Let's say that web server running an application with global SSRF. You can use that SSRF exploit to gain access to the EC2 data credentials. This is profile credentials.
Yeah.
The IMDS service is default service. So
Okay.
I still see IMDSB1 a little bit. Want to move to V2 because that V2 requires you to set a header with the credentials. And that's hard to do this.
All right, they can't really hear, so if you want them to move to.
So you want to should move to IMDS.
Talk into this.
Yeah, so I see IMDS v1 a little bit still. And yeah, you'd want your customers or clients to move to IMDS v2 to reduce your SSRF risk. Because IMDS v1 creates a greater attack surface for SSRF to be able to potentially pivot further into your environment.
Thank you. That was awesome.
There's another one. It's a good time for questions?
Yeah, we got.
Okay. I'm curious if there were random attacks in the AWS cloud, would they be integrated back forensically?
That's an open-ended one. One of my live hacks that I do, I actually ransom. So, well, I don't literally ransom, but what I do is I encrypt files that I found. So I go one step further here, and what's in S3, I'll literally encrypt it. Right, and I'll just encrypt it, and then I have the original one. Forensically, it's the same situation, right? Are you covering your tracks? Are you coming in from, a compromised host? Are you coming in from a VPS or something like that? So yeah, forensically, there's going to be a trail left behind, but how well did you do cleaning up your tracks as well as obfuscating them to begin with by coming in through like an already compromised server or something like that? But yeah, I mean, if there's CloudTrail, there's going to be a log, there's going to be a record of it. Yeah. I will say this, like what is it? They call it cryptojacking is one of the terms I've heard over the years. I almost feel like it's more of a marketing thing because I mean, I haven't really seen a lot of that in the wild, right? Where your people are literally getting like their S3 buckets encrypted and being held ransom. It's technically possible, but it's not super prevalent.
There were some folks arrested for it.
Or,
But when you say marketing, it reminds me of like Kanye mindset, all PRs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, one more. Do you see any interesting persistent technique?
I don't. But that's not the world that I live in every day. Okay. So I'm going to open up to the room as well. Did any of you have any input on that? No. Yeah. I can't comment on that. It's not the world I live in. I don't do IR, that kind of stuff. I prevent it. Any other questions? Nope. Yeah.
So you've got thousands of issues along with your AWS account in terms of what IAM positions you've assigned to role users. How do you prioritize? Where do you start? If you had to start going through a list and knocking out positions, what's your top thing?
Let me flip the question around. What do you care about? Why are you securing the cloud anyways? Why did you buy your Wiz? Why did you buy your CNAT? Why did you buy your CSPM? What are you trying to protect? That's the point. So that's where you start. You start with the crown jewels. Okay. You figure out who and what can access what means the most to the business, and you secure that. Okay. I don't care if that's a prod. I don't care if it's a data lake account, whatever that might be. Lock it down from the inside out. And we've been asked that so many times over the years. There is nothing more powerful when you're securing the public cloud, because like you said, it's all kinds of alerts and alarms and problems and across all the hundreds of accounts. Where the heck do we start? There's nothing more powerful than being able to start with the patient records, to start with the blueprints to the elevator's new IoT software, right? And work your way out and figure out and have something to show you who and what can access that right now across all those different accounts, right? And then just chip away at it. That's what you do, right? I tell everyone that. Start with what means the most to the business. That's why you're employed to begin with, okay? Who gives a crap about a sandbox account that's got a bunch of over permissioned identities? We don't really care about the UAT environment, non-prod. Focus on protecting what's most sensitive to the business. Okay, cool. All right, we are not done. Yes, sir.
Will a robust properly configured IAM policy script will it be able to prevent something like this? To prevent bypassing attacks like this, accessing lateral movements through the cloud, through assuming different roles. With a robust IAM policy, you would stop that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's impossible. Yeah.
Possible?
You're not gonna be able to write IAM policies for 56,000 identities at that, or 26,000 over permissioned identities. So in a perfect world, you could write a policy to get rid of all of that. But it's not one policy. It's thousands of policies. You guys ever heard of service control policies? There's resource control policies. There's inline policies. There's managed policies. Individual resource least privilege policies. I mean, it's not a joke when I say getting to least privilege right now by hand in any sort of mature environment is impossible. You will never win at that battle. It is a never ending battle. What's that?
Unless you're hourly.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's never ending. Yeah. You need something else, right? And that's kind of what we're going to get into. But yeah, you're right. If you could write policies to get rid of everything to least privilege, you could write policies to block everything that is unused, right? And break the trust and all those kinds of things. More power to you. But it's impossible at scale. It is.
So, I'm just gonna stop right here, but I'm going to possibility. Do not have a defined security strategy around the cloud. Do not have a proper way to onboard applications into that environment, which is why all of these things occur.
Mhm.
So you say, well, because what I've kind of seen typically is no one wants to address that issue, right?
Yeah.
It isn't sexy. It is.
Well, developing securely is a burden.
Right.
I mean, how are you going to develop at least privilege?
Well,
You have to figure out every individual permission that every possible role needs for this application. Then you can deploy at least privilege, but then tomorrow the needs of the application change.
right, but I think if you attach the security team within the actual design process, you can make it better. The
Absolutely.
challenge typically is they let the application do it, don't.
Yeah, that's how the real world
They
works.
identify these 30 things, and then they say, well, listen, we gotta be in production.
Yeah.
Right, so they see these steps.
You start with something that has minimal privileges. You can say, I need this one extra after one.
Mhm.
But you're the other way, you already failed that, done in production, then you're stuck with capital costs for that. You have to redesign it. Redesign means you have to rewrite it down. Recode it, and that means you have to deal with that under the threat of break things, it becomes.
Well, you run into the same issue either way, whether you start permissive and are like, oh, we're gonna scale it back later, and you end up with like the credentials creep. You end up in that same place after a large enough period of time where it's like, we don't necessarily have visibility on all these things, and we need to prioritize these things, but it's like you get privilege creep, you end up in the same place inevitably.
You do, but it still, to me, it goes back to process.
Fundamentally, you're right. Yeah, I mean, you need to build securely. But it's not just build securely. The problem is you have got to build process into the entire SDLC to clean it up constantly, to curate it, to are there identities out there that have more permissions now than they need? We got to go right size those. Are there identities that we needed 2 quarters ago, but now we don't need? Got to go clean those up. That's the problem, is there's no hygiene.
Go back to I have a very different definition of an identity, depending upon what it's. And I think for the most part, we have lived in this world where people think about identity. Hey, I hired someone, I want to give them direct access to something that's it. But the non-human population of identity is really,
That's the problem.
that's the biggest issue.
They usually outnumber what we see as human identities 10 to 1. Yeah. And they're so much more scary.
The value, even if you want to solve this issue, the value that you bring in addressing that problem, there's a 10-to-1 value ratio. And if you solve the problem with non-human identity, then you do with identity. But if you talk to 99% of most organizations out there, they're focused on, hey, we need to connect up our identity platform with the Workday and make sure you get an AD service now.
Yep.
Security is a non-value add activity. None of this matters until you put it in terms of risk anyway, like from a business standpoint.
Until you have a bad day.
Yeah, I think that is the worst thing ever.
Well, it's technically, I mean, that's true.
Because we always place this concept that security is non-value, but really it should be a business. If we articulate this message to business, this is about business. They go there, I can help you sell more faster, more security, reduce risk, and use the amount of things that comes back to us instead of just saying, we'll help you reduce risk, because
If there's no value to the business, that's going to fall on deaf ears. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Effective is SSO deployment.
Go ahead.
How effective are you seeing like SSO deployment, like with AWS single sign-on or other things like that? Like, are they getting rid of traditional access keys in most environments at this point
They are.
for human access?
Yeah. If you're not using, so you're familiar with Identity Center, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're using AWS SSO, that's what you should be using. If you're not, you need to switch at this point. But yeah, almost everyone's relying on Identity Center and coming in with the permission sets that are associated with it, where essentially those roles where they then have that, they become those roles that are attached to the permission sets. They don't need the keys at that point in time.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing less and less worry and concern about keys and a massive shift over to Identity Center.
Great.
For that in the Microsoft Cloud versus temporary roles.
What was the first part, sorry?
Is there an equivalent to IAM users versus IAM roles, like in GCP?
Yeah, service.
Yeah.
There's service principals in Azure and service accounts in GCP. Same thing.
But I mean, like the IAM user concept, like where it's like a permanent access key, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all have it. They named it. If you look at the different architecture, Azure, GCP, and Amazon, the models are that kind of thing. Like they just renamed it.
Yeah, that's the exact same concept. Yep. everything. Microsoft just makes it ugly and messy though. Sorry for all you Azure people.
Hey,
I know,
Jay,
I know you're locked into your EAs. All right, so what can we do, right? The takeaways. Well, obviously clean up the mess, right? But seriously, we've got to focus on cleaning up the unused identities. So much of that risk that we see with those lateral movement attack paths to the IAM fabric are hops, but the vast majority of those hops are unused, 61%. Okay, 61% of those hops are unused. When you break the chains, that's how you break the chains. Okay, all that risk goes away. If I can't hop, I can't go anywhere. Okay, it's a dead end. Apply and monitor hygiene, least privilege. Okay, lifecycle management. So just so you know, like our customers are like PayPal and American Airlines. I'm not going to name this one because they were giving all their developers in prod, they're Fortune 100, by the way. They were giving all their developers in prod star access. Why? They did not have the time or resources to figure out least privilege. They just didn't. Okay. So they just accepted the risk, monitored, babysat it. Okay. They did. That's what they did. They don't do it anymore. Okay. You've got to think about least privilege. You know, in a perfect world, I would love it if you could develop in a sandbox, in a development zone, run a privilege analysis tool, do all your testing, make sure the web app works, then look at every single identity in that tool that you used and look at the permissions that it used. Now you've got a least privilege policy, boom, put it right on there, right? What happens then? You deploy at least privilege. It's beautiful, but then you got to maintain it. There's that hygiene, right? But that's really how you would ideally do it, right? Is to deploy at least privilege when you go into prod. Looking for misconfigurations, anomalies, but this one's big. Treat IAM as code. And again, that's just building it into the software development lifecycle. Thinking about those identities that maybe you don't need anymore, misconfigurations, cross-account trusts, those kinds of things. This is a screenshot from our old tool, Sunry's first product, if you will. You know, I've been talking about those paths and the chains. This is a screenshot. Does it look familiar? Same identities that we just exploited. They've been around a while in this AWS test org that I've got. Right, but this was our product illuminating what I just showed you. And our customers would ask us, like PayPal, how the hell do we break the chains? Right? That's how you break the chains. You just get rid of the risk, right? And if you can't delete these, at least put them in jail, put them in a quarantine. You can do that a couple different ways. Okay, I mentioned SCPs. SCPs are how we can control things across all those different services and different identities inside AWS. This is an AWS kind of talk that we're doing this evening. But there's ways that you can do this with resource policy in the other clouds as well, right? It is a manual process. It is error prone. It is tedious and manual. You have to keep updating. You can also write individual IAM policies by hand if you want. And then delete the cyber litter and the cyber garbage, right? But you can't delete it until you know that you can safely delete it. And that is a lot easier said than done. And that's kind of how we get this unused identity proliferation. To get a little bit deeper, these are some screenshots from AWS. Sure, you're very familiar with them, as are you, right? This is Access Analyzer. This is Access Analyzer doing what? It's looking for unused roles, unused identities, and overprivileged ones. It's going to tell you if it's not used, you got to go delete it. It's going to tell you if it's over permissioned, you got to go right size it. And here's the optimal policy. Okay. This is an example of a service control policy, restricting services, restricting regions. Right now in AWS, if you want to turn off access to all 350 services that they have, that, oh, by the way, are all turned on by default because they're in the business of selling services. If you want to go turn them off, you better love this JSON, because that's how you have to go do it. Okay, control regions, very similar, especially if you want to get that granular with controlling access to specific services in specific regions. Take it a step further, as it relates to least privilege. This last one over here, blocking third parties and vendors. As if service control policies weren't enough. Back in November, December at reInvent, I was there. We co-announced support for what are called resource control policies in AWS. It's an extension of SCPs, and what it allows you to do is, for the first time ever, set what's called a data perimeter for third-party access. So you can literally say, no third party shall ever be in my cloud and touch KMS, S3, DynamoDB, et cetera, right? And those are called resource control policies. You also have to write those by hand. Okay? Or do you?
What do
Yeah, most people don't know about these. So 5 services now: S3, Secrets Manager, KMS, SQS, and STS. Okay, and what that means is that no external entity is allowed to access these, and only these specific principal accounts are allowed to access them. It's interesting. It was a hole that was in SCPs all these years that people were complaining about, and they finally gave us an option. And if you want the marketing term, it's called setting a data perimeter. It ensures that your data never leaves your cloud. Okay. Sunray is the only vendor in the world that will automatically create these and manage these.
Yeah, Google's kind of announced what they call secure product. Where you can pretty much lock out. So I am user, regardless of what the role says.
Yeah.
Policies that you said, I don't care what the role says.
You nailed it. This policy will supersede any role that you have. Yep. So RCP is super exciting. The big takeaway is it controls third-party access into those services. Okay. Yeah. Like I could put a resource policy on a bucket that says that, you know, TK Elevator has full access to this S3 bucket. That RCP will block that in a heartbeat.
I assume you could apply that to like federated access.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. But you gotta write it by hand. Or no, you don't. So shameless plug, that's what we do. This is why our customers come to us. They're sick of this world. With us, you never have to write another SCP by hand. You never have to write another least privilege policy by hand. You never have to write another RCP by hand. That's what we do, is we automate that. We actually put in a default deny inside IAM, just like you would have a default deny inside a next-gen firewall. It's pretty cool. That gives us some superpowers that you would never be able to do with getting to least privilege by hand.
Let's skip one comment. Not the environment that creating kind of and saying, let's start transitioning applications over into these.
Honestly, no. I'm being honest. Because of the burden that would do the business, I think, with those applications that are so critical. No. Now, the only time that we see people that are moving accounts and things like that are when they've architected so, I don't want to say poorly because I don't want anyone to get offended. When they have incorrectly architected and they're not using things from a management and control perspective like AWS organizations, right? Or they're not using Azure tenants properly, that kind of thing, right? Where they don't have that level of governance from the top down. They have a bunch of standalone accounts, standalone subscriptions, standalone projects. That's the mess that you have no choice. But if you've done that, at least that level of architecture correctly, no, I don't typically see starting over in greenfield. Yep. Okay, so takeaways, right? These are the nuggets that I want you to leave with, right? Identity is not just the perimeter, it's the new network, okay? It governs every single thing. It predicates anything from a network perspective. It predicates anything from an infrastructure as a service perspective. PaaS is where it's at, especially from a cloud native perspective. That you have to start thinking of IAM like a network. And you have to start thinking of IAM the same way that you would a network when it comes to security. You wouldn't build a data center with no firewalls where everything could talk to everything. You shouldn't do the same thing in IAM, right? IAM needs to be segmented. You need to build it at least privileged as best as possible. Focus on the unused identities. Again, there's the one thing that I could recommend that you focus on. It's that mess, that cyber litter, the cyber garbage that's out there that's just not used. That constitutes the vast majority of the risk that we see in IAM on a day-to-day basis with our customers. Okay. You understand over permissioned access. I beat that one to death. Misconfigurations, wildcard permissions, cross-account trust, backwards resource, or backward trust, resource policies that allow third parties in. You got to worry about those. And then you need some kind of automation. I'm not saying that I'm not trying to sell the cloud permissions firewall. What I am saying is that you need some sort of automation. I had someone today, I did a demo this morning, and the guy was asking me, can I just build like a Lambda that goes and does a bunch of this? I'm like, oh, like there's nothing that automation that we do in the cloud permissions firewall from an automation perspective that you can't try and do yourself, right? But then you've got to maintain them. Then what if there's turnover? You've got all these in-house tools that you're worried about, right? But there needs to be some level of automation. And I would say just in time, it's crucial. Does everyone know what just-in-time access means? Okay, ideally, you don't need a bunch of IAM users. You don't need a bunch of, roles that everyone's coming in there assuming constantly. Ideally, there should be no standing entitlements out there in your production environment, and you should grant those entitlements as needed. There's plenty of JIT tools out there. Okay, massive market, JIT, PAM, PIM. There's like 5 acronyms for the same thing. Okay, but that's really from a human perspective. That's what you want to do is just-in-time access. You have access to go into this prod environment, mess around with Bedrock, the models, SageMaker, this VPC for an hour, and then we claw it right back. You have no standing entitlements. That's really what you would love to get to. Okay. All right. Any more questions?
There were 2 online.
Yeah, let's do it.
I feel like you kind of just answered this. What's your favorite cloud security tool?
What's my favorite cloud security tool? Okay, so I'll be practitioner. I'll put the practitioner hat on. I wouldn't say that I would lead with the cloud permissions firewall. I would see that, like, everyone's heard of CSPM, right? Or CNAPS, which is just an evolution of the CSPM. You got to have visibility, right? Without visibility, you have no freaking clue that there's a problem, right? So I would say if you don't have visibility, get a visibility tool. And I'm not going to say that there's a vendor, right? And you can use native tools, right? There's GCP, which they just bought Wiz. That's going to become their security tool now, their CNAP. You've got Azure Security Hub and all that stuff. Or you can use the, AWS tools, or you can go third party, which there's tons of CNAPs and CSPMs, right? I would say that there needs to be visibility to justify the problem, right? But I'm going to say that is absolutely not enough. Seriously, if you can't fix it, then what's the freaking point? Okay, so visibility, great. Get yourself a visibility tool, but you need something that's actually going to be able to fix it as well.
The second one is, have you ever seen anyone using Aardvark? Netflix wrote it as the least privileged tool a few years ago, but it's being unmaintained.
I have heard of it. It's because you sometimes hear about that Netflix tool, but I've never seen it, and I've never heard of anyone using it. There's a lot of homemade tools like that. We spoke last year at Reinforce. I'll be at Reinforce in a couple of weeks, which is the big AWS security show. It was in Philly last year. We spoke right before Meta spoke on the stage. Everyone knows Meta, right? We spoke, and our co-founder and CTO, he talked about what we do. And he got off stage, and the Meta CISO was like, we built that. And he's like, I would never recommend anyone do what we did. He's like, it was a bear. So they built the whole thing in-house and they maintained it. But I could imagine how much upkeep is. It's kind of the same thing. Any other questions? All right, what do you guys think? Was this helpful? Yeah? Okay, cool. Yes, sir.
Advise somebody, well, you would be equipped with such expertise. What path? Yeah. Best.
Wow. Well, first of all, are you interested in being a practitioner or in sales? Because I'm on the dark side of sales.
Well, you're not a tech guy.
I am a tech guy. I'm a sales engineer.
Okay.
I mean, I can do it. I do all, right? That's the big thing. I think that it really does pull down to. And I interviewed, gosh, probably hundreds of SEs for our company. Okay, for my team. And the biggest problem I see is that everyone's paper. Right?
No, they lie.
Exactly. And
We gotta put the word.
that's the bottom line. Like, if you can't actually lab this,
You can think
Prove
of
it.
ostrich, probably.
yeah, and then, yeah, I mean, you gotta go,
You gotta be hands-on.
Have to.
Yeah.
like, when I learned Kubernetes, that was brutal. I did what's called Kubernetes the hard way. Built it all by hand. Right? But now I fully understand clusters, master slave, pods, all that, right? I understand it. I can talk about it because I have that muscle memory for that. So I would say whether or not you're interested in being a practitioner, sales, as a technical engineer like me, whatever that might be, you gotta get, like, I don't care what, I mean, I don't care what sort of.
We
I
talked
could care less.
earlier about
I would say if it's short. Anything, I would say, there's that big snake book, EC Council, all bullshit. So, and I told them, first off, you can barely type.
Oh, like,
Yeah.
You know, anything that, you know, stuff is good, not. But some of the basic certifications are just good with terminology. I don't know if I can have a conversation with somebody who knows about it, but got to go hands-on.
Yeah, I mean, that's.
Watching all the damn YouTube videos of the world gets you to the point of maybe stop.
I couldn't talk about it if I hadn't done it. That's just the truth. You have to go do it. You have to go actually build this and test it, especially IAM. It's so easy to go build it. Like, I've talked to so many people, interviewed so many people. I'm like, yeah, you know, AWS, what do you, oh, yeah, I got an EC2. I'm like, oh, you have no idea what you got.
But you have to do something. It's just having to say, oh, I've installed Linux. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to.
See, that is where I was really getting to. No, because, yeah, I've done, you know, some people have done projects, but there's some level of advanced level too, where it's like, well, you couldn't have gotten there without experience doing it, and some of it you cannot just do it yourself.
because we were talking about that, like, for me to make my own instance and not what I invite you and you, and now I have 3 people I'm in control of, it's not the same experience that this 50,000.
Yeah, but I don't manage an organization with 50,000. I manage a tiny little sandbox. But you still, the principles are the same.
The principle is, see, that's true.
Has a free trial, so you go into AWS. How does this tool work? And understand the nuances of that, and that's not the same as managing an organization, but that also teaches you technical details of that tool. And those details in aggregate are a large part of that. Right?
There's so many free labs, you just, especially on YouTube.
I can do that. I hate that.
I spent like tutorials on what to go, how to go build a lab and how to actually, like, in your environment, I'm gonna go build this environment and it's gonna, you know, cross-account trust, privilege escalation, where you can actually do all these things, right?
If you're looking for.
You gotta build it, you have to have something to teach you how to go build the environment. And then you can go actually try and break it and try and exploit it.
We all have free trials.
Yeah, everything has a
Free
free
trial.
trial.
Trials, but we 200 megabytes, whatever it is, Azure or whatever, build the sandbox out, right? Try the S2 storage or whatever, you know, the elastic storage or whatever you guys.
Yeah.
AWS, it's the same stuff, it's just named different.
I do think like 3 years or forever, all right? So lives on network security. Then you have people who dedicated their lives doing SIM operations. You have people who dedicated their lives to coding. Then you have people who dedicated their lives learning how to do firewalls. You have people who dedicated their lives to doing routing and network. And then all of a sudden you have these cloud-based environments that essentially is now doing all of those things. Right? And then an organization says, okay, I need to hire a couple of Amazon engineers, or Amazon AWS engineers, with the expectation that they actually know how to do all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And actually,
Require 15 years experience.
right.
On technology that's 2 years old.
And I don't know what they would have been better off saying, we want you to go learn networking instead of Amazon. We want you to go learn DevOps instead of Amazon. Well, we want you to learn IAM operation.
It got funny.
Yes, correct.
They want to hire the expert.
I would say like if you're looking for like a resource to get hands on, because like AWS, you get and stuff, like if you don't sound environment, gets rid of like 4, 5, 6, 7 accounts and managing it on that. This guy is called Control.io. Like he really helped. Like you can follow his stuff and build stuff on your own, like manage things across various accounts, and it gives you like the practical experience you need. Like when it comes to CSP was talking about, right? You can use security though. When you work into like an enterprise, for example, you might find here you like figure it tools, whatever, but then you already have that automated stuff.
If you have the foundation,
It's transferable.
the conversation that I have with you, it's clear to me that you have actually done this. And you've built this. That's all I need. I don't care if your last job was whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't care what your last job was. I don't care what you graduated college from or not. I don't care what your certification. With me, you have, because our customers will rip you to shreds because they are experts in this. Right? So with me, you just have to actually know what you're doing.
Yeah, it might
And
be
you have
more
to be able
valuable, even in some cases, to know how to use like Terraform type tools to manipulate the environment. Right? How the environment works. You have to conceptually know what's going on, but most companies, once they get to any size, I would say rarely. This is going to be temporary. You're rarely do something by hand. You're going to create Terraform to do it all, so it's all consistent.
That's it. Even we're terrible. 99% of the organizations I talk to are terrible.
Yes.
But
If you can't do infrastructure as code, then
you know, but they got to that point because people were jacking stuff up.
yeah.
So they had to find a way to.
So that's what's the other way too, is there's so many different tools, you're never expected to know all of them. You know most of it. So you don't know some parts of it, that's all. Use something that is a different tool that's comparable, also automatically because it works in vaguely similar ways.
But I think
They
you also have to
expect
always
you to
learn
know
new
like
stuff.
how the architecture, right? So
Yes.
if you go in, there's hundreds of tools and you're picking, you're trying to use this, and this that don't pair well together. The expectation is also that you go in, if you've done the fundamentals, you should know how to architect the system. Hot, cold storage way, database versus like having, like you should know how to connect those things to resource groups, things like that, right? And then create those subnet layers, right? I mean, it's fundamentals, you can scale it, right? It's okay, you have 10 users, sandbox versus 50,000 user sandbox, you can scale it. Scale it.
I think to go back to your original question, you guys gotta go do it. Don't focus on memorizing the certification questions. We gotta go laugh. Do it, we can build it. That's the only way I can talk about this. I can go show you everything that I just did. Right?
Fundamentals is all.
Get to that expert level.
Right, well, just not even just get to that expert level, but I mean, if you want that next role.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
Like you do everything.
I just want to see how like they do this.
Well, here's the thing is, once you have the foundation, now I'd say, what do you want to be? Okay, do you want to be an SRE engineer? Right? Do you want to do just cloud security, an architect? Right? Do you want to get into the sales game, become a sales engineer? Right? You have all those capabilities once you have that technical foundation.
And I would say, biggest thing, I'm huge. do you actually know how all of this stuff fits together? Not necessarily the details of everything, but do you know how it's supposed to work? Because to me, if you don't understand the big picture, sometimes the value that you can bring from a technical standpoint is limited because you're not thinking about how are these changes, what am I doing, how is it going to affect the overall operation, right? So I would interview people who said they were privileged access management experts. And then I would say, okay, how do you, and they would say, well, privileged access is really, really important. Okay, great.
They would just start reading your own copy of your
How would
website.
you implement?
Yes, really?
So until this day, probably the most frustrating thing is you can walk into an organization, they would say that they have a privileged access management strategy. And they need to secure their privileged identity. And they want to start talking identity. I think the identities are, the only thing that makes a privileged identity is an actual a role or an entitlement that gave you privilege in the first. So you really should understand your privileged access. And then anything that hasn't becomes a privileged identity. But if you walk in and you ask someone, you know, what are they doing around privileged access, how they're securing it, and so on and so forth, you know, and they start talking about we need to identify the accounts that are privileged and said, what makes it privileged, right? Same thing, Active Directory. You know, they say, oh, we have all of these privileged accounts in AD. And I will say, well, you know, Active Directory is providing access to not only Active Directory, but for a number of other applications. And you can have an AD group called, I don't know, Privileged Access Administrator. From an AD standpoint, it's not privileged. But from your Privileged Access Manager solution, that's usually that group to provide access into your solution and other solutions, it is extremely privileged. But if you go and talk to all the vendors who are kind of doing everything and trying to secure privileged IDs inside of Active Directory, they're talking about that they can identify privileged accounts. They're talking about they can identify privileged accounts that are specific to the rights within Active Directory, but it has nothing to do with the additional privilege that is granted because you have 20 applications that are integrated in Active Directory. So understand the big picture. That thing that they don't.
You have a question?
Yeah, so specific to doing it yourself. So I saw that your URL said trial.
Oh, yeah.
So is there, because I have a lab set up for the cloud AWS. So would that be something that I would be able to?
Yeah, you can work our website, sign up for the free trial. Check it out.
Yes, I definitely. Yeah, I was going to say, I definitely would.
Where are you with?
Independent consultant.
The IAM.
I'm gonna make you sign a disclaimer. Yeah, you guys hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to send you a copy of the script. Especially you, because you're gonna see the trickery I did.
Okay, oh, yeah.
I cannot believe you called me out on that. That was pretty damn cool. So technically, when I enumerate the roles, you shouldn't see the role from that other account.
I thought you were granted in an IAM policy specific to this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I kind of, I short circuited it, showing you what that, and I had to show the cross account trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was good. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I do a lot of cross account stuff.
Yeah, that's cool.
But we have like we pull all the trust policies database.
Yeah. Where do you work? Really? Okay, cool.
Not AWS.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's the biggest one.
Wait, is that?
Yes. That's another one. Yeah.
Well, this whole thing is built on AWS. Our whole.
She has a question.
Yeah.
I had a question. So like you spoke about like human identity. In terms of like your solution, right? How does it work for machine identities? But like a lot of that is stuff that, but human identity was big, right? Let's delete like who's this user? You didn't know what's
Yeah.
right? But for how does your machine?
Yeah, so, and I really tried not to get into the product. So the way that works is, we call them zombies. Okay, so we got really great least privilege analytics. We plug in, all we need to roll, and we're able to give you the lay of the land. No different than IAM Access Analyzer, Wiz, or any of the CNAPs CSPs, right? But that's where their story stops. That's where our story starts. Okay, because they're just visibility tools when it comes to IAM. And so what we do is we say, listen, you've got all these unused identities, person and non-person. They're all categorized the exact same. Okay, and what happens is there's a person icon versus a robot. That's about it. Right? To us, they're all the same. It has been used in 90 days, 180 days, etc. Click a button, and what it does is it quarantines. So what it does, it puts, who's getting into the nerd knobs now? Does anyone know what AWAC is? Yeah, bingo. AWAC versus RBAC. Yeah, so what we do is AWAC, so it's attribute-based access control. So what happens is, because we have our lightweight layer of orchestration in your AWS environment, just SCPs, CNPs, allow us to do our magic and our role. What happens is, you don't have to go research 500 identities, or that customer with 50,000 unused identities. With a click of a button, all 50,000 go into a quarantine. What happens is, with that click of a button, we instantly put a tag on. That tag says that you can no longer use your entitlements at all. Okay, and that tag is dictated in the organization management account with FCP. Dictates what that tag means. That tag means you can't use your permissions. You instantly put you in jail. Okay, person and non-person, they're all the same. If one of those attempts to wake up, we call it animation. That will fund the zombie term. The zombie tries to animate, wake up. Our default denial will block it, and we'll send whoever is the approver at that scope a Slack or a Teams message. After we give our product, all of the orchestration is done through Slack or Teams. We call it chat ops. And so you can grant permissions, you can grant entitlements, you can revoke them. It's all done through Slack or Teams. And you can let X role wake up for 1 hour and go do whatever it needed to do for your TPS reports, right? And then after an hour, it goes right back into the quarantine, and there's no risk with those 50-something identities sitting there. Now, do I recommend that you clean the 50,000 identities up? Hell yeah. But they're no longer a risk to the business. That's not priority one to you and the team. You can go focus on your other priorities.
How long do you keep them defined?
It's up to you. Up to you. They can stay in the quarantine. We got customers that they like the fact that their identities stay in the quarantine because they do need them once a quarter or once a year, right? And there's no risk for them being out there because they're effectively neutered. They can't do anything. That's what I'm saying. There's no other company out there doing what we're doing.